Welcome to American Scandal Report by Skoob. I'm your host, OZ Dalton, and today we're diving deep into one of the most troubling trends in modern Christianity, the epidemic of scandals that have rocked the megachurch world. From sexual abuse cover ups to financial corruption, from posthumous revelations to present day downfalls, we're examining how institutions built on trust have become breeding grounds for exploitation. This isn't about attacking faith itself, but rather understanding how power without accountability can corrupt even the most sacred spaces. Let's start with what many consider the earthquake that shook evangelical America to its core. 2 months after an investigation began, the Houston Chronicle released a bombshell report that would forever change how we view one of America's largest religious denominations, the Southern Baptist Convention. The numbers are staggering and heartbreaking. From 1998 onwards, approximately 380 Southern Baptist leaders and volunteers faced accusations of abuse, resulting in over 700 victims. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. These weren't isolated incidents swept under the rug by accident. This was systematic negligence on an institutional level. Churches repeatedly failed to inform law enforcement when allegations surfaced. They didn't warn other congregations about individuals under suspicion. Instead, perpetrators were quietly moved from one position of authority to another, like a deadly game of musical chairs where the music never stopped and innocent people paid the price. When confronted with these revelations, SBC leadership did what many powerful institutions do when caught. They deflected responsibility. They pointed to the autonomy that each local church enjoys under the SBC umbrella, essentially saying, "Don't blame us, we can't control what individual churches do." But here's the hypocrisy that cuts to the bone. This same organization had acted swiftly in the past to expel churches for hiring female pastors, yet seemed unable or unwilling to discipline churches that continued to employ known sex offenders. Let that sink in. They had the power and willingness to act when it came to gender roles, but not when it came to protecting children and vulnerable adults from predators. The most heartbreaking aspect of the SBC scandal wasn't just the abuse itself, it was the response to the victims who dared to speak up. These brave individuals were often encouraged to forgive their abusers, creating a twisted theology where mercy became a weapon against justice. The result was devastating. Victims, rather than their predators, found themselves ostracized from their communities. Imagine the courage it takes for someone to speak up about abuse, only to be told that the Christian thing to do is to stay quiet and forgive. It's a perversion of faith that turns grace into a tool of oppression. One victim described this perfectly, calling it an epidemic powered by a culture of our own making. This wasn't happening in spite of church culture, it was happening because of it. This toxic environment caught the attention of Rachel Den Hollander, the attorney who became famous for helping bring USA gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar to justice. Den Hollander, herself a conservative evangelical, made a statement in 2018 that sent shockwaves through the religious community. She declared that the church had become one of the worst places to go for help for abuse victims. Even more damning, she asserted that if her abuser had been an evangelical pastor instead of a doctor, she would have been actively vilified and lied about by every single evangelical leader out there. This wasn't an attack from the outside. This was a faithful believer holding up a mirror and forcing the church to see its own reflection. Den Hollander's critique went deeper than individual failures. She exposed a fundamental theological problem. At Larry Nassar's trial, she observed how he sought forgiveness without showing true repentance, and she connected this to what she saw happening in churches across America. Her words were prophetic. The gospel of Jesus Christ does not need your protection. She was addressing the tendency to safeguard the church's reputation by downplaying or concealing abuse. This desire to protect the institution's image had become more important than protecting the vulnerable people the institution was supposed to serve. She argued that true faith demands justice, not just forgiveness. While God embodies forgiveness, he also demands accountability. The idea that we can simply pray away consequences or cover up evil in the name of protecting the church's witness is, according to Den Hollander, a fundamental misunderstanding of Christianity itself. Her message was clear. Jesus demands obedience, which should manifest in advocating for justice, standing up for victims and the oppressed, and honestly addressing the truth about the evil of sexual assault and the evil of covering it up. As allegations continued to surface, prominent evangelical leaders scrambled to respond. By spring 2018, Al Mohler, one of the most respected voices in Southern Baptist life, admitted he felt like he was facing an avalanche of accusations, each one capable of causing destruction. Mohler's response revealed something important about how these leaders viewed the crisis. He pondered whether their core doctrines might be to blame, specifically questioning if complementarianism, the belief in male leadership in church and home, might serve as camouflage for abusive males and permission for the abuse and mistreatment of women. It seemed like a moment of genuine self-reflection, but Mohler quickly retreated from this uncomfortable territory. He countered his own concerns by asserting that the same Bible that shows God's compassion for victims also supports the complementarian pattern of male leadership in the home and the church. In other words, the problem wasn't the system, it was just bad people misusing the system. John Piper took an even more troubling approach. Rather than seeing the Me Too movement as an opportunity for introspection, he saw it as a chance to defend patriarchy. In a March 2018 podcast, he actually blamed women's vulnerability on egalitarianism, the belief in gender equality. According to Piper, complementarianism called upon men to care for and protect and honor women, while egalitarians had stripped women of these protective measures. He argued that manly valor could curb male misconduct, completely missing the irony that many of these abuses were happening within complementarian systems that were supposed to protect women. Piper's credibility on abuse issues was already questionable due to his previous statements. In 2009, when asked if a woman should submit to abuse, his response revealed the dangerous implications of rigid complementarian thinking. He distinguished between different types of abuse based on severity. Life-threatening situations demanded one response, but verbal unkindness was apparently different. If a husband imposed severe demands, like participating in morally objectionable activities, Piper suggested gentle refusal. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. If the situation involved just verbal abuse or minor physical aggressions, he suggested enduring it for a season and seeking church help only as a last resort. This kind of thinking creates a hierarchy of harm where some abuse is considered tolerable, even Christ-like in its endurance. It's theology that transforms victims into martyrs and frames their suffering as somehow virtuous. Some within the evangelical community tried to create distance between what they saw as extreme forms of complementarianism and their own moderate version. Nathan Finn, a professor at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, argued in 2010 that it was unfair to associate mainstream organizations with figures like Doug Phillips and the Duggar family, whom he identified with far-right extremes. Finn claimed that while these groups shared some beliefs and terminology, their application differed significantly. He worried that conflating the two created a misleading complementarian caricature and encouraged readers to clarify their beliefs to prevent confusion. But here's the problem with Finn's argument. The connections between mainstream and extreme complementarianism weren't accidental. During the culture wars of the 2000s, these groups had grown closer together through networking and alliance building. The ideological affinities were real and substantial. Meanwhile, the consumer market ignored such distinctions entirely. Doug Phillips's DVDs sat on the same shelves as mainstream evangelical materials. The Duggar family became a nationwide sensation on mainstream television, bringing extreme patriarchal ideology into millions of homes under the banner of wholesome family entertainment. The line between normative complementarianism and biblical patriarchy was far blurrier than leaders like Finn wanted to admit, and the failure to clearly distance mainstream evangelicalism from its extreme edges had real consequences. And now, while the Southern Baptist Convention was dealing with institutional scandals, another earthquake was building in the world of Christian apologetics. Ravi Zacharias had spent decades as one of evangelicalism's most celebrated intellectual defenders of the faith. Born in India, Zacharias had built an impressive resume, delivering lectures everywhere from palace courts to college cafeterias, from sports arenas to small-town sanctuaries. His organization, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, became a cornerstone of modern evangelicalism, producing books, videos, and educational materials while amassing tens of millions of dollars. The praise for Zacharias was universal and effusive. Franklin Graham called him one of the great Christian apologists of our time. Tim Tebow suggested he deserved a spot in the Hall of Faith. When he died, Louis Giglio described his passing as accompanied by the thunderous applause of heaven. Even Vice President Mike Pence called him the greatest Christian apologist of this century. But this towering reputation would soon crumble in the most spectacular way imaginable. A year after Zacharias' death, a completely different picture emerged. He was revealed to be not a defender of faith, but a prolific sexual predator who had used his spiritual authority as a weapon against vulnerable women. The allegations began with 3 women who worked at spas near Atlanta that Zacharias co-owned. They accused him of sexual abuse, leading Christianity Today to conduct independent interviews and RZIM to hire an external investigation firm. What investigators found was worse than anyone had imagined. Zacharias had systematically used his spiritual influence to earn the trust of susceptible women, made them financially and emotionally dependent on him, then exploited them sexually for his own gratification. The evidence was overwhelming. Investigators discovered hundreds of contacts for massage therapists across the US and Asia on his electronic devices, alongside explicit photos he had solicited from victims. Some women reported that Zacharias had positioned his sexual dominance over them as a reward for his life devoted to God, a perverse theology that turned abuse into a twisted form of divine favor. When donors filed a class action lawsuit claiming their contributions had been diverted for nefarious purposes, the evidence against Zacharias became undeniable. The esteemed Christian figure had been leading a double life that was the complete opposite of everything he publicly claimed to represent. The Zacharias revelations were particularly painful because of how completely he had fooled even sophisticated observers. Julie Roys, an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing church scandals, admitted that she had been completely blind to Zacharias' true nature. In 2017, when a couple had accused Zacharias of sexual manipulation and requested explicit photos, Roys dismissed the accusations outright. When Zacharias responded with a lawsuit and eventually silenced his accusers through a non-disclosure agreement, Royce felt vindicated in her loyalty to him. I can still remember texting his assistant saying, "It's so terrible what they're doing to Ravi," Royce later reflected with dismay. Even though she was investigating misconduct elsewhere, she couldn't face the possibility of similar improprieties with Zacharias. This blindness wasn't limited to journalists. Ordinary believers who had found meaning and inspiration in Zacharias' work struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the reality of who he actually was. The cognitive dissonance was profound. How could someone who spoke so eloquently about truth and morality be living such a comprehensive lie? Moving from sexual scandals to financial corruption, we encounter another persistent problem in megachurch culture: the prosperity gospel and its most visible practitioners. Kenneth Copeland represents perhaps the most extreme example of how religious authority can be leveraged for personal enrichment. Copeland's ministry revolves around the idea that faith and financial contributions lead directly to personal wealth and success. It's a seductive message that transforms religious giving from an act of service into a transactional investment. Give money to get money, with God as the ultimate guarantor of returns. The lifestyle this theology has afforded Copeland is breathtaking in its excess. Reports indicate he owns multiple luxury residences, a private airport in Texas, and a fleet of private jets, including one acquired from actor Tyler Perry. When questioned about these expenditures, Copeland argues they're necessary for his ministry work. Apparently, the gospel can only be spread in luxury. The Trinity Broadcasting Network, founded by Paul and Jan Crouch, provided a platform for Copeland and others to spread this message to millions of viewers. Despite facing various controversies over the years, TBN continued to thrive by capitalizing on the charisma of its founders and programming focused on prosperity theology. Copeland's financial practices eventually drew attention from the highest levels of government. In 2007, Senator Chuck Grassley launched a Senate Finance Committee investigation into 6 televangelists, including Copeland, to ensure their financial operations aligned with their tax-exempt status. The investigation highlighted serious concerns about transparency and accountability, particularly focusing on how these ministries used donated funds. Kenneth Copeland Ministries was notably uncooperative, providing limited information while citing privacy concerns and claiming accountability only to donors and the Internal Revenue Service. Although the investigation ended without legal consequences, It underscored the complex issues surrounding financial transparency in religious organizations. The fact that a ministry could claim tax exemption while refusing to fully disclose how it used donated funds revealed significant gaps in oversight and accountability. But perhaps most troubling were Copeland's theological claims during this period. He asserted power to control weather, claimed Christians could attain wealth and health through faith and positive confession, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, made bold statements that the pandemic was over, while performing rituals like symbolically blowing the virus away. Copeland's behavior fits into a broader pattern of televangelist scandals that have plagued American Christianity for decades. The rogues gallery includes some truly spectacular falls from grace. Oral Roberts made headlines in the 1980s when he claimed God threatened to call him home unless $8 million was raised. He later claimed he could raise the dead, though no evidence was ever provided to support this assertion. Jim Bakker, along with his wife, Tammy Faye, built the PTL Club and sold expensive partnerships in a Christian theme park while misusing funds for luxury items and personal bonuses. After sexual scandals emerged, he was convicted of fraud and served prison time, only to eventually return to television with a new message and a new wife. Jimmy Swaggart, who had been a vocal critic of Bakker, was caught in his own prostitution scandal in 1988. After a public apology and being banned from TV ministry by his church, he returned to broadcasting. When caught with another prostitute later, he dismissed criticism by saying, "God says it's none of your business." Pat Robertson, founder of the Christian Broadcasting Network, claimed his prayers prevented natural disasters and made controversial statements, including blaming 9/11 on various social groups. Jerry Falwell, founder of the Moral Majority, frequently made inflammatory public statements and was stripped of tax-exempt status for political activity. While historical scandals provide context, 2024 proved to be a particularly devastating year for megachurch leadership, with multiple high-profile falls occurring in rapid succession. The year's most shocking revelation involved Pastor Tony Evans, a highly respected Christian leader who had served for nearly 5 decades. On June 9, 2024, Evans announced he would step down as senior pastor at Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, citing an unnamed sin and acknowledging a failure to exercise righteous judgment. The vague nature of his admission only added to the speculation and concern. While no legal crime was committed, the acknowledgement that he had fallen short of biblical leadership standards sent shockwaves through his congregation and the broader Christian community. Even more devastating was the scandal involving Pastor Robert Morris, founder of Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas. In mid-June, Cindy Clemsher accused him of sexual abuse that began in the 1980s when she was just 12 years old. Morris was serving as a teaching pastor at Shady Grove Church at the time. The most damning aspect was that Morris had previously admitted to an inappropriate relationship but had deliberately concealed the victim's age. An independent investigation found that several church elders knew about the abuse but chose to cover it up, prioritizing the church's reputation over justice for the victim. The Morris scandal had immediate and severe consequences. Following the revelations, he resigned and disappeared from public view entirely. 4 elders, including Morris's own son, also stepped down. The scandal severely damaged Gateway Church's reputation and led to a reported 30% drop in attendance, a tangible measure of how these revelations shatter the trust that religious institutions depend upon. Another major development involved Steve Lawson, a prominent voice in Reformed evangelical circles who served as lead preacher at Trinity Bible Church in Dallas and held the position of Dean of Doctor of Ministry Studies at the Master's Seminary. On September 19, 2024, Trinity Bible Church announced that Lawson had been removed from all ministry roles due to an inappropriate relationship with a woman. Reports later confirmed the relationship had lasted 5 years and only came to light after the woman's father confronted him directly. The consequences were swift and comprehensive. Lawson resigned from One Passion Ministries, and several of his speaking engagements and published works were withdrawn. His removal sent shockwaves through the evangelical community, particularly among those who had viewed him as a model of doctrinal purity and moral integrity. We close this chapter on faith and failure with hard truths that can't be ignored. From institutional silence to unchecked power, these scandals reveal what happens when accountability disappears and protection of image outweighs protection of people. Reform isn't optional. Honesty, transparency, and safeguarding the vulnerable are the only paths forward. Because real spiritual authority is measured not by status, but by integrity. But what we've uncovered here is only part of the story. Hidden testimonies, deeper patterns, and unanswered questions remain, and they may challenge everything you thought you understood about leadership and belief. Download the Skoob app now to get access to the full story. And step into the revelations we couldn't fit into this episode.